If you are over 60, stop what you are doing right now. Because what I am about to tell you in the next 60 seconds could explain something that has been quietly happening inside your body, and almost nobody is talking about it. Have you ever stood up from a chair and felt the room tilt for just a second? Have you ever drunk a glass of water and felt your heart suddenly beat stronger than it should? Have you ever woken up at 3 in the morning, not because of a noise, not because of a dream, but just wide awake for no reason at all? Most doctors will tell you that's just part of getting older. But that is not the full story. Because here is what they are not telling you. After 60, your body does not break down randomly. It sends signals, specific signals, small ones, quiet ones, the kind most people brush off as nothing serious. But those signals, they are a language. And if you do not know how to read that language, you could be missing what your body has been trying to tell you for months, maybe years. The dizziness when you stand, the heart that suddenly feels too loud, the sleep that never feels deep enough, the digestion that stopped cooperating, the ankles that swell by evening, the fatigue that hits you after doing almost nothing. These are not random. They are connected. And once you understand the pattern behind them, everything changes. In the next few minutes, you are going to learn exactly what these signals mean, why they happen after 60, and, most importantly, the simple daily adjustments that can make your body feel more stable, more predictable, and more like yours again. Stay with me, because this might be the most important thing you watch this week. Why the body after 60 plays by different rules. For many adults over 60, the body does not usually change in loud or obvious ways. It shifts quietly in the background, and you begin to notice it in small, everyday moments, like when you drink a glass of water, stand up, and feel something slightly different. Not strong enough to alarm you, but enough to make you pause and wonder if that sensation was always there, or if it is something new. A lot of people immediately assume this is just getting older, something random and unavoidable. But the body rarely works in a random way, especially after 60. Because what is really happening is that your system is still functioning well, often very well, but it is no longer as quick to adjust to sudden changes. And that slight delay is exactly what you begin to feel. If you think about it in practical terms, it is similar to a car that still runs smoothly, but no longer responds well to abrupt movements. The engine is capable, the structure is intact, but it prefers gradual changes rather than sharp transitions. And inside your body, that shows up in how your blood pressure shifts, how your circulation adapts, and how your nervous system responds to movement or fluid changes. This does not mean something is wrong, and it certainly does not mean your body is failing. It means your body is asking for a different rhythm. And when that rhythm is ignored, small sensations begin to appear. Things like brief dizziness, a subtle pressure in the chest, or a heartbeat that suddenly feels more noticeable. Not because they are new problems, but because they are now more visible responses. So instead of thinking of your body as weaker, it is more useful to see it as more sensitive and more communicative. Because these small signals are not interruptions, they are information. And once you start paying attention to that information with calm and clarity, the patterns become easier to understand. And the next signal you are about to see is one of the most overlooked of all. The morning signal. Why standing up can feel harder after 60. You may have felt this without giving it much thought, especially in the first few minutes after waking up, when the room is still quiet, your body is warm from the bed, and you sit up expecting a normal start to the day. But the moment you stand, there is that brief wave, a light dizziness, a floating sensation, or a second where your balance does not feel fully settled. and you instinctively pause before taking the first step. Most people brush that off almost immediately and say the same thing to themselves, that it is probably nothing, that it is just age, that maybe they got up too fast, and sometimes that is partly true. But what makes this more important after 60 is that these small morning episodes often reflect a very real shift in how the body regulates blood pressure, circulation, and position changes, especially after hours of lying down. When you are in bed, blood is distributed more evenly across the body, and the heart does not have to fight gravity in the same way. But the instant you stand, gravity pulls blood downward into the legs and lower body, and your heart, blood vessels, and nervous system have to respond quickly to keep enough blood flowing to the brain. Which is why younger bodies often make that adjustment so fast that the person never notices it, while older adults may feel every second of that transition. After 60, that response can become slower for several reasons, including stiffer blood vessels, medications that affect pressure, mild dehydration, reduced muscle pumping in the legs, or simply a nervous system that no longer corrects as sharply as it once did. And the result is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is just a foggy second, a need to hold the mattress, a hand reaching for the wall, or that quiet feeling that you should not start walking just yet. What matters here is not panic, but pattern recognition. Because if this happens often, your body may be telling you that it needs a gentler transition in the morning. So one of the smartest habits is to sit at the edge of the bed for a few moments. Move your feet and ankles before standing. Let your circulation wake up with you, and give your system time to catch up. Because that simple pause can change the way the rest of the morning feels. And the next signal becomes even more interesting when you realize it can happen even before you feel thirsty. The thirst signal. Why you can be dehydrated without feeling thirsty. This surprises a lot of people after 60, because they assume thirst will always warn them in time, the same way hunger tells you when to eat, or fatigue tells you when to rest. But the body does not always send that message as clearly in later years, which means you can move through an entire morning feeling mostly normal, while your system is already running a little drier than it should. And that quiet gap between what the body needs and what the mind notices is where many subtle symptoms begin. You may see it in ordinary moments that do not look connected at first, like getting up and feeling slightly off, noticing your mouth feels dry only after lunch, realizing your energy drops for no obvious reason, or wondering why your head feels a little heavy even though the day has barely started. And this is exactly why mild dehydration after 60 is often overlooked, because it rarely arrives like an emergency. It tends to arrive like a collection of small annoyances that are easy to dismiss one by one. Part of the reason is biological, not personal, because the brain areas involved in detecting fluid balance and triggering thirst become less responsive with age. So the body may already need more water before that familiar urge to drink ever appears. And on top of that, many older adults naturally drink less because they do not want to use the bathroom as often. They get busy, they do not feel thirsty, or they simply stopped building hydration into the rhythm of the day without realizing how much that pattern changed over time. And the effects can travel farther than people think, since even mild ongoing dehydration can make blood pressure less stable, make the heart work a little harder, slow digestion, affect concentration, increase fatigue, and sometimes even make a person feel older than they actually are. Which is why this is one of those quiet body patterns worth respecting early. And honestly, these are the kinds of overlooked signals we keep coming back to on this channel, because once you notice them, so many other body changes start making more sense. A smart approach is not to wait for thirst at all, but to make hydration more automatic and less dependent on memory or sensation, which can mean keeping water visible, taking small sips throughout the day instead of large amounts all at once, and paying attention to patterns like darker urine, dry lips, sluggishness, or headaches that show up when you have not had enough. Because once hydration stops being reactive and becomes steady, the body often feels more stable, And the next sign becomes especially important because it can make people think something is wrong with the heart, when the real story is a little more nuanced. The heart signal. When your heart feels stronger after simple actions. There are moments that catch your attention in a very specific way. Like when you climb a few steps, carry something light, or even drink water a bit faster than usual. And suddenly you feel your heart beating more noticeably. Not necessarily painfully, but strongly enough that you stop for a second and become aware of it. As if your body briefly moved from the background into the spotlight. For many people over 60, this can feel unsettling, because the first thought often goes straight to concern. Something must be wrong. Something changed. Maybe this is the beginning of a problem. But in many situations, what you are actually feeling is not danger. It is sensitivity. Because the cardiovascular system becomes more reactive to small shifts in effort, volume, and pressure. And that reactivity makes normal adjustments feel more visible. When you do something like drink a full glass of water quickly, your blood volume increases in a short window of time, and your body immediately tries to adapt by adjusting heart rate and vessel tone. But because arteries are not as elastic as they once were, that adjustment can feel stronger, more noticeable, almost exaggerated compared to what you remember from years ago, even though the mechanism itself is still a normal response. The same thing can happen with small physical efforts, because the heart may need to respond a little faster or with slightly more force to maintain circulation, especially if hydration is not ideal. If there is some stiffness in the vessels, or if the body is coming from a resting state into movement without a gradual transition, which is why these sensations often appear suddenly and then disappear just as quickly. What matters most here is learning to read the pattern instead of reacting to the moment. Because brief, occasional awareness of your heartbeat that settles on its own is often very different from symptoms that persist, intensify, or come with chest pain, shortness of breath, or dizziness. And once you start noticing when these sensations happen and what triggers them, the picture becomes clearer, which sets up the next signal that many people mistake for a sleep problem, when it is actually connected to something happening inside the body at night. The sleep signal. Why waking up at night may be more than just sleep changes. You may have noticed that nights are not as continuous as they used to be. Where you go to bed, fall asleep, and instead of waking up rested in the morning, you find yourself opening your eyes once, twice, sometimes even 3 times during the night, often for no clear reason. And at first it feels like a sleep issue, something light, something you assume is simply part of getting older. And yes, sleep does change with age. It tends to become lighter, more fragmented, and easier to interrupt. But that is only part of the story. Because what many people do not realize is that your body is also redistributing fluids while you sleep. And that internal shift can quietly trigger the need to wake up, especially when the system is already dealing with changes in circulation and kidney function. During the day, when you are standing or sitting for long periods, fluid tends to settle in the lower parts of the body, particularly in the legs and feet, even if you do not notice swelling directly. But when you lie down at night, that fluid begins to move back into circulation, increasing the volume that your kidneys need to filter, and as a result, your body produces more urine during the night than it did earlier in the day. That is why many people wake up needing to use the bathroom, not because they drank too much water right before bed, but because their body is processing what accumulated throughout the day. And if hydration timing, circulation, or even mild retention is not well balanced, that cycle can become more frequent, more disruptive, and more tiring over time. A practical way to respond is to shift more of your fluid intake earlier in the day, reduce intake closer to bedtime, and pay attention to signs like ankle swelling or tight shoes at the end of the day, because those small details often connect directly to what happens at night. And once you start seeing that connection, the next signal becomes easier to understand, especially when it shows up after meals and feels like your digestion is no longer as predictable as it once was. The digestion signal, when your stomach starts responding differently. You may have had this moment recently, where you eat something that has been part of your routine for years, something familiar and usually comfortable, and instead of feeling fine afterward, you notice a sense of heaviness, maybe a slight burning, or just the feeling that your stomach is taking longer than usual to settle. And it leaves you wondering why something so normal suddenly feels different. Many people assume this means they developed a new intolerance, or that something is wrong with the food itself. But often the shift is not in the food, it is in the way the body is processing it. Because digestion after 60 tends to slow down, not dramatically, but enough that meals sit longer, enzymes may be less active, and the coordination between stomach and intestines becomes less efficient than it once was. At the same time, the nervous system that helps regulate digestion, especially through the vagus nerve, becomes a little less responsive, which means the signals that tell the stomach when to release acid, when to move food forward, and how to coordinate the entire process are not as sharp or as synchronized. And that can turn a normal meal into a slightly uncomfortable experience without any obvious cause. There is also a layer that many people overlook, which is the effect of medications. Since common prescriptions for blood pressure, inflammation, or supplements like iron can irritate the stomach lining or slow digestion even more. And when you combine that with larger meals, fast eating, or lying down too soon after eating, the body may respond with reflux, bloating, or that persistent feeling of fullness. What tends to work better is not forcing the body back into old habits, but adjusting the rhythm to match how it works now, which means eating a little slower, choosing slightly smaller portions, giving your body time between meals, and noticing which foods consistently feel heavier than others. Because once digestion becomes more predictable again, you start to feel more stable overall. And that stability becomes important as we move into the next signal, which shows up not in the stomach, but in how steady you feel when you are simply standing still. The balance signal. Why the ground can feel less steady. Sometimes there are moments when this shows up so subtly that you almost talk yourself out of noticing it. Like standing in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil, turning too quickly in the hallway, or getting up to walk during the night and feeling, for just a second, that your body is not fully organized underneath you. Not enough to call it a fall, not enough to call it vertigo, but enough to make you slow down without even thinking about it. What makes balance so tricky after 60 is that it depends on several systems working together at the same time, not just one. Because your eyes help tell the brain where you are, your inner ear helps detect motion and position, and the nerves in your feet, ankles, joints, and muscles constantly report how your body is shifting through space. So when even two of those systems become slightly less precise, the result may be a kind of quiet instability that appears before a person ever describes themselves as unsteady. This is one reason balance changes can feel confusing, since the problem does not always come from weakness alone, and it does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it is reduced sensitivity in the feet. Sometimes it is slower reaction time. Sometimes it is poorer lighting. Sometimes it is medication. And sometimes it is the simple fact that the body no longer corrects position as automatically or as quickly as it used to, which means little misjudgments that once disappeared instantly now become sensations you can actually feel. The mistake many people make is waiting until balance becomes a serious issue before respecting it. But the body usually gives small hints first, like reaching for furniture more often, hesitating before stepping down, feeling less confident turning with something in your hands, or realizing that walking in the dark feels much less natural than it once did. And those signals matter, because balance is not just about avoiding a fall. It is about protecting independence, confidence, and freedom inside your own home. A very smart response is to train balance before it becomes a bigger problem. Not with anything extreme, but with simple, safe practice, like standing near a counter and shifting weight slowly, holding a chair while standing on one foot for a few seconds, improving lighting at home, removing loose rugs, and paying attention to what times of day you feel less steady. Because once you start reading those patterns with maturity instead of embarrassment, the next signal becomes even more important. Especially when something as simple as drinking water too quickly seems to trigger a stronger reaction than it used to. The pressure signal. What happens when you drink water too fast after 60? This is one of those moments that seems too simple to matter, which is exactly why so many people overlook it. Because you walk into the kitchen, fill a glass, drink it quickly in a few large swallows, and within seconds you feel something unusual. Maybe a stronger heartbeat, a light pressure in the chest, a brief warmth, or a strange sense that your body had to react more than expected to something that should have felt completely ordinary. What is happening here is not always about the water itself, but about the speed of the change. Because when a larger amount of fluid enters the system quickly, your body has to adapt in real time. And after 60, that adjustment can feel much more noticeable than it used to, especially when arteries are less elastic, the nervous system is more sensitive to shifts in pressure, and the heart is working with a circulation pattern that prefers steadier transitions instead of sudden internal volume changes. In practical terms, your body is trying to manage a rapid input, which means blood vessels respond, pressure sensors react, the heart may briefly change how forcefully it beats, and the kidneys begin the slower job of helping rebalance what just entered the system. So even though the whole event may last only seconds, the sensation can feel surprisingly real. And honestly, these are the kinds of small but meaningful patterns that make a channel like this worth following. Because once you understand what the body is quietly doing, everyday experiences stop feeling so mysterious. That does not mean every reaction to drinking water is harmless. And this is where maturity matters. Because a brief and repeatable sensation that happens mainly when you drink too fast is very different from chest pain, sustained palpitations, severe shortness of breath, or symptoms that show up without a clear trigger. So the smart move is not fear, it is observation. And one of the easiest changes you can make this week is to drink more slowly, take smaller sips, and notice whether the sensation fades when the pace becomes gentler. Very often, that simple change tells you a lot, because the body after 60 gives clearer feedback when you stop forcing it into abrupt patterns and start working with its timing instead. And once you see how strongly the body reacts to speed, the next sign becomes even more revealing, especially when your feet or ankles begin telling a story long before the rest of the body says a word. The foot signal. Why your feet and ankles often show the pattern first. One of the most overlooked places to watch after 60 is not the chest, not the stomach, and not even the head, but the feet and ankles. Because that is often where the body reveals circulation changes first, and it usually does so in quiet ways, like shoes feeling tighter by evening, socks leaving deeper marks than they used to, a strange heaviness after standing, or the sense that your lower legs are carrying more of the day than they once did. A lot of people dismiss that as normal swelling, and sometimes it is mild and temporary. But what matters is the pattern behind it, because the feet sit at the far end of circulation, meaning they often show you early signs of fluid retention, reduced vein efficiency, less movement during the day, or a body that is not moving blood and lymph back upward as smoothly as before. Which is why these small lower body changes can say a lot about what the whole system is dealing with. After 60, several things can make this more noticeable, including less elastic blood vessels, weaker calf muscle pumping, longer periods of sitting, certain medications, warmer weather, and circulation that simply does not recover as quickly after a full day upright. So by the time evening comes, the body may be holding on to more fluid in the lower legs, and that can make the ankles look puffier, the feet feel fuller, and the body seem more tired than the day itself would suggest. The important thing here is not to overreact to every small mark from a sock, but to stop ignoring repeated signs that follow a pattern, especially if swelling is more frequent on one side, worsens quickly, comes with pain, or starts showing up with shortness of breath or unusual fatigue. Because that is very different from mild end-of-day pooling, and in everyday situations, simple support can help a great deal, like walking more often, flexing the ankles when sitting, elevating the legs later in the day, and paying attention to how strongly your body responds to movement. What I like about this signal is that it is visible, which means it gives you something concrete to observe, instead of something vague to guess about. And once you begin seeing how the feet and ankles reflect the state of circulation, the next sign becomes even more revealing. Because sometimes, the body does not show fluid or pressure through swelling at all. It shows it through sudden fatigue that seems to arrive out of proportion to the effort you just made. The energy signal. When simple effort feels heavier than it should. There are days when this shows up in a way that is hard to explain. Because you do something small, something you have done your entire life, like walking across the house, carrying groceries, or even getting dressed. And instead of feeling normal afterward, you feel slightly drained. Not exhausted, not sick, just heavier, as if the effort cost more than it should have. And that quiet mismatch between effort and energy is something many people notice but rarely stop to analyze. At first, it is easy to blame sleep, mood, or just a slow day, and sometimes that is part of it. But when this pattern repeats, especially after light activity, it often reflects something deeper in how the body is delivering and using energy. Because after 60, circulation, oxygen delivery, hydration, muscle efficiency, and even blood sugar stability all play a role in how energy is felt, not just how much energy you technically have. What makes this signal interesting is that it is rarely caused by one single factor. Instead, it is often a combination of small inefficiencies that add up. Maybe the body is slightly dehydrated. Maybe circulation is not moving as smoothly. Maybe meals are spaced in a way that creates energy dips. Or maybe muscles are doing more work because they are not being used as regularly or as efficiently as before. And none of these alone would create a big problem. But together, they change how effort feels. This is where people sometimes make the wrong move, which is to push harder or ignore the signal completely. But a more effective approach is to observe when the fatigue appears, what you were doing before it, how long it lasts, and whether simple adjustments make a difference, like drinking water earlier, breaking tasks into smaller steps, adding short walks instead of long sedentary periods, or simply allowing a few minutes of rest between activities instead of moving continuously. What you often find is that the body responds surprisingly well to these small changes. Not instantly, but steadily. And that is important, because when energy becomes more predictable, you regain a sense of control over your day. And that clarity sets up the next signal in a powerful way, especially when something that seems like a normal habit is actually making these patterns worse without you realizing it. The common mistake. When pushing through quietly makes things worse. This is something that shows up in very real, everyday situations, like finishing a task even though your body is asking for a pause, walking a little farther even when your legs feel heavier than usual, or ignoring that subtle fatigue because you have always been someone who pushes through and gets things done. And on the surface, that sounds like strength, like discipline, like the right mindset to have. And to be fair, that mindset probably served you very well for decades. But after 60, the body does not always respond the same way to being pushed. Because what used to build resilience can sometimes create more strain, especially when recovery is slower, hydration is not ideal, circulation is less responsive, and the nervous system is already working harder to maintain balance and stability throughout the day. The problem is not effort itself. Effort is still important and often necessary. But the pattern of ignoring signals is where things begin to shift. Because the body rarely jumps straight from fine to serious. It usually gives layers of feedback first. Things like mild fatigue, slight instability, a heavier heartbeat, or slower recovery. And when those are consistently overridden, the system has to work under pressure instead of in rhythm. What tends to work better, and this may sound simple, but it is powerful, is learning to adjust effort instead of abandoning it, which means taking short pauses before the body demands them, spacing activities instead of stacking them, allowing recovery between movements, and recognizing that maintaining energy across the day is often more valuable than completing everything in one stretch and paying for it afterward. And this is where a small shift in thinking changes everything. Because respecting the signal does not mean becoming fragile. It means becoming strategic. It means working with your body instead of against it. And once that mindset settles in, the next step becomes clearer. Because now, it is not just about avoiding mistakes, it is about actively supporting the body in ways that make these signals less frequent and more manageable over time. The support habit, the small daily adjustments that help the body feel more stable. By this point, a pattern starts becoming easier to see. Because many of these signals are not appearing out of nowhere, they are often the result of a body that now responds better to steadiness than intensity. Which means the goal is not to overhaul your life in one dramatic move, but to make a handful of small daily adjustments that reduce stress on circulation, hydration, digestion, and energy all at the same time. What helps most is usually not complicated, and that is good news, because the body after 60 often improves more from consistency than from ambition. So things like drinking water in smaller amounts across the day, standing up more gradually, avoiding oversized meals, taking short walks instead of staying still for long periods, and giving yourself a better rhythm between effort and recovery can have a bigger effect than people expect, especially when these habits are repeated calmly instead of done perfectly. This is also where many people get distracted by big promises and fancy solutions, when in reality the most effective support habits are often the plain ones that work with the body's biology instead of trying to overpower it. And that is one reason so many people come back to channels like this one, not for drama, but for practical guidance that actually fits real life and helps make everyday body signals easier to understand without turning health into a full-time job. A simple way to begin is to choose one morning habit, one daytime habit, and one evening habit. Maybe sitting before standing in the morning, sipping water steadily through the day, and reducing liquids too close to bedtime. Because when the body gets predictable support at different points of the day, it often becomes less reactive. And those little changes can make symptoms feel less random and much more readable within just a week or two of steady attention. And that matters more than it may seem. Because once the body becomes a little more stable, you can start separating what is merely sensitive from what deserves closer concern. And that distinction is where many older adults regain confidence, since the next topic is not about doing more. It is about understanding when a quiet signal stays quiet and when it begins crossing the line into something you should take more seriously. The filter signal. How to tell the difference between a sensitive body and a more serious pattern. This is where maturity matters more than fear. Because once you start noticing these body signals, the next question is not whether every sensation means danger, but whether you can tell the difference between a body that has become more sensitive and a pattern that is becoming more serious. And that distinction is incredibly important after 60. Because the wrong reaction in either direction can create problems, either by ignoring too much or worrying about everything. A sensitive body often gives signals that are mild, explainable, and connected to a trigger, like standing up too fast, drinking water too quickly, eating a large meal, staying seated too long, or overdoing effort without enough recovery. And those signals usually settle when the trigger changes, which means they follow a pattern. They repeat in understandable ways, and they often improve when the body gets better timing, better hydration, better pacing, or a little more support. A more concerning pattern tends to behave differently. because it does not always wait for a trigger. It may feel stronger, last longer, or appear more unpredictably. And it can come with warning features like chest pain, fainting, swelling that is sudden or one-sided, shortness of breath that feels new, fatigue that is out of proportion to simple activity, or symptoms that are clearly becoming more frequent instead of stabilizing. And that is when the body is no longer just asking for small adjustments. It may be asking for medical attention. One of the most practical things you can do is keep a simple mental or written record of what happens, when it happens, how long it lasts, what you were doing before it started, and whether it improves with rest, slower pacing, hydration, or a change in position. Because that kind of pattern recognition helps you in two ways at once. It reduces vague anxiety when something is explainable, and it gives you much clearer information if you do need to speak with a clinician. That kind of clarity protects more than your health. It protects your confidence. Because the goal is not to become hyper-alert to every sensation. The goal is to become more accurate, more observant, and less confused by your own body. And once you have that filter in place, the next step becomes much easier. Because now you are ready to organize all of this into a simple week-long reset that helps you actually use what you learned instead of just nodding along and forgetting it tomorrow. The 7-day reset. A simple way to start reading your body more clearly. By now, you have probably noticed that these signals are not random little annoyances scattered across the day. They are often connected by timing, hydration, circulation, digestion, sleep, and the way the body handles transitions. Which means the smartest next step is not to chase 10 solutions at once, but to create a very simple 7-day reset that helps you observe your body under better conditions and see what changes when the basics improve. The goal of this reset is not perfection, and it is definitely not to turn your life into a health project from morning to night. It is simply to reduce the background noise that makes the body harder to understand. So for 1 week, you give yourself steadier inputs. Drink water more gradually instead of all at once. Stand up more slowly. Keep meals a little lighter and more balanced. Avoid heavy late evening fluid intake, and break up long periods of sitting with short movement whenever you can. What makes this kind of reset useful is that it gives you contrast. Because when the body has been living inside a pattern of rushed hydration, abrupt movement, irregular meals, poor pacing, and fragmented sleep, it can be hard to know what is a true warning sign and what is simply the result of friction building up across the day. But once those stress points are lowered even a little, the patterns become easier to read, and the body often becomes much less reactive. A practical version can be very simple, where each morning you sit at the edge of the bed before standing. Each afternoon you take one short walk, or move your legs after sitting. And each evening, you reduce the things that tend to make the night more restless, while also paying attention to a few basic questions. Did I feel dizzy today? When did my heart feel most noticeable? How was my energy after meals? Did my ankles swell? And how often did I wake up overnight? Because those answers begin telling a much clearer story than memory alone. And that is the real value of this reset, because it moves you out of guesswork and into observation, without making you fearful or obsessive. And if something improves, that tells you the body was asking for support. While if something stays the same or gets worse, that tells you the signal deserves more respect. Which leads naturally into the next step, where everything comes together with one final layer of perspective that helps you leave this conversation feeling more prepared, not more overwhelmed. The perspective shift. How to leave this with clarity instead of concern. At this point, it is easy to look back at all these signals and feel like your body is doing too many things at once, sending too many messages, changing in ways that feel unfamiliar. But what usually brings calm back into the picture is realizing that most of these signs are not random problems stacking up. They are part of a system that is still working, just asking for a different kind of attention than it did years ago. One of the biggest shifts that helps here is moving away from the idea that every sensation needs to be fixed immediately. Because after 60, the body often responds better to understanding than to urgency. And when you start seeing patterns instead of isolated events, things like dizziness, sleep changes, digestion, hydration, and energy begin to connect. And that connection reduces confusion in a way that no quick solution ever really does. There is also something important to say clearly, which is that noticing these changes does not mean you are losing control. In many ways, it means the opposite. Because awareness gives you options. It gives you timing. It gives you the ability to adjust before something becomes bigger. And that kind of quiet control is what allows many people to maintain independence, stability, and confidence much longer than they expected. At the same time, it is worth keeping one grounded principle in mind, which is that not every signal should be managed alone. And this is educational, not medical advice. So if something feels sudden, strong, unusual, or progressively worse, that is the moment to involve a clinician, and not just rely on observation. Because knowing when to act is just as important as knowing when to adjust. And as you move forward, the goal is not to remember every detail from this video. It is to carry one simple mindset with you: that your body is not working against you, it is communicating with you. And when you learn to read those patterns calmly and respond with small, steady changes, things tend to feel more stable, more predictable, and much easier to manage in everyday life. The quiet advantage: why understanding your body now changes everything ahead. There is something important that often gets missed in conversations like this, because when people hear about body changes after 60, they tend to focus only on what is being lost, what is slower, what feels different. But there is another side to this that deserves attention, and it is the fact that the body, in many ways, becomes more honest, more direct, and more willing to show you exactly what it needs if you are willing to pay attention. What you have seen throughout these signals is not a list of problems. It is a map, a way of understanding how hydration, movement, circulation, digestion, sleep, and energy all interact in real life. And once you begin to see that map clearly, everyday experiences stop feeling random and start feeling readable. Which means you are no longer reacting blindly. You are responding with awareness. And that changes the relationship you have with your own body. This is where many people quietly gain an advantage. Because while others ignore these small signs or feel confused by them, you begin to recognize patterns earlier, adjust sooner, and avoid unnecessary strain. And that does not require extreme discipline or constant effort. It comes from small, steady awareness, the kind that builds over days and weeks and makes your body feel more predictable instead of more uncertain. And the truth is, you do not need to master everything at once. You do not need to remember every signal perfectly. You just need to carry forward the idea that your body is communicating in patterns, not in isolated events. And when you respect those patterns with simple actions, better timing, and a little patience, the system tends to stabilize in ways that feel natural rather than forced. So if there is one thing to take with you from all of this, it is that you are not at the mercy of these changes. You are in a position to understand them. And that understanding is what protects your independence, your confidence, and your ability to move through daily life with more ease. Because when the body is heard instead of ignored, it usually responds in ways that are far more supportive than most people expect. If this video helped you, the next one might reveal something important about your body. Take a moment to watch it now. You may notice something you've been ignoring.